Hollow Knight is a desolate, lonely, haunting, beautiful, fluid game. The game makes you feel alone, but also intrigued. It slowly introduces story, mechanics, traversal, and it does it in a way that is both satisfying and rewarding. Hollow Knight gives the player as much or as little as they want. A great example of that is the story. The game starts with a cutscene of your character coming across the town of Dirtmouth. There are huts and shacks, but none of them are open. There is only one old man in the center of town. He goes on to tell you about Dirtmouth and how it used to be a lively town. That's all the player gets. From there, you'll find other characters throughout the labyrinth you explore, each one of them offering a bit more backstory. It's up to the player to piece these conversations together and figure out what happened. There are different monuments and structures that also give clues. If you wanted, all of that can be skipped. Hollow Knight definitely takes inspiration from the Soul series in that aspect. The Soul series is able to give their worlds life and history without ever beating the player over the head with story. Hollow Knight does a masterful job of that as well. Hollow Knight's combat was a little lacking for me. At first. I've come to absolutely love it. I can't believe the combat went from this to this. There's a nice mix of magic and melee skills, as well as traversal skills that really help out in combat. The game does a really nice job of giving you moves and abilities after you defeat a boss. Once I started to understand the mechanics and how Team Cherry wanted me to play, everything clicked. It's clear that the game takes inspiration from the Soul series with not just the story, but the combat as well. As you explore and run into enemies, you'll die, and die, and die, and die. There are a ton of different ways to perish in this game. When you do die, you leave behind a shade. This shade contains all of the Geo, which is the currency, and the soul you have collected. The good news is you can get all of that which you lost back, as long as you can make it back to the spot where you died and defeat your shade in combat. You'll get everything back and collect more soul. Your soul is important. The gameplay loop of hitting enemies to collect soul, using that soul for magic or healing, and then hitting the enemy again to gain more soul is very satisfying. The game is constantly challenging you to balance healing and magic. I found myself debating which to use during boss encounters. There were plenty of times where I was down to my last shell. I knew the boss was close to being defeated, so I had to make a choice. The downside to healing is that you are stationary while focusing. The downside to magic is if you miss, well, you're kind of screwed. There are ways of making the combat a bit easier. As you explore, you'll find characters that can upgrade your primary weapon, the nail. Upgrading your nail will make it more powerful, allowing you to defeat enemies with less hits. You can also collect charms. You can purchase certain charms, but you'll find a lot out in the world. Each charm does something different. For example, the Thorns of Agony charm will summon thorny vines that injure enemies around you each time the player is hit. There's also the Spell Twister. This allows the player to use magic at a reduced soul cost. There are 45 charms in total, so make sure to mix and match charms to fit your playstyle. I thought the game did a brilliant job of mixing in easier enemies and extremely difficult ones. Hollow Knight will push even the best players to their limits. Between enemies, mini-bosses, bosses, optional bosses, and some other surprises, this game will constantly keep you on your toes and test your reflexes. Aside from magic and charms, you can also acquire sword arts from 3 different characters around the world. These are the Great Slash, the Dash Slash, and the Cyclone Slash. Each sword art can help you out in different scenarios. You can use these by holding down the square button and then releasing the button. For example, if you are being surrounded by enemies, the Cyclone Slash is your best bet. There are so many options for combat. It's been a ton of fun mixing charms with my style of play and trying to find the perfect build. I love the enemy design in this game. Each area of Hollownest has enemies that really fit the aesthetic the areas are going for. There are some repeat enemies in certain areas, but that isn't really a big deal. A lot of enemies are fairly easy to deal with. You'll have to be patient and learn timing and patterns from other enemies and bosses. If you don't, be prepared to die. A lot. Overall, the combat is fluid, tight, and incredibly satisfying. Like with combat, the traversal and movement in Hollow Knight felt lackluster. I felt slow, like I wasn't agile even though my character is tiny. Boy, was I wrong. Between the items you get and charms you acquire, the game really opens up. I guess I shouldn't be too surprised, it is a Metroidvania after all. I was comparing the movement of Hollow Knight to one of my favorite games in the genre, Guacamelee and Guacamelee 2. Those games are fast and fluid with some really challenging platforming sections. Hollow Knight is no different. Between items like the Mothwing Cloak, which allows you to dash on the ground or in the air, the Mantis Claw, which allows you to cling to walls and jump off, allowing you to reach higher areas that were off limits before, or the Crystal Heart, which allows the player to channel the energy of the crystal and release it, causing the player to hurtle forward at breakneck speeds. I personally have been using two movement charms, Sprint Master and Dash Master. Sprint Master increases the base movement speed of my character, and the Dash Master charm allows me to dash twice as often and also dash downwards. That makes it perfect for tough combat sections. Each item, charm, or move you get is so expertly placed around Hollownest. You may find the item somewhere in the world. You may get one of those helpful items from a boss. It's up to the player to find these, and that leads me into one of my favorite parts of the game. The exploration is great. Whenever you enter a new area, the game doesn't allow you to see yourself on the map. You have to find the cartographer and buy the map from him. Then, and only then, will you be able to see the area and the locations within that area that you've been to. Couple that with the Wayward Compass charm, and you'll be able to see exactly where you are. That's just half the fun. Getting lost, exploring, and eventually finding the map is quite rewarding. The real fun begins when you can see the map and the paths that you haven't been on yet. Some of these paths you'll be able to venture down, but like any good Metroidvania, a lot of paths will open up after you've progressed. Even though there will be plenty of paths that aren't accessible, you are still rewarded for exploring. There's always something to find. It could be charms, geostones, items to sell, or a way to connect two different paths. That leads me to level design. I found myself grinning from ear to ear or exclaiming yes a lot. There are so many shortcuts and secret areas. Sometimes you'll run into a switch and that releases a wall or doorway that makes getting from one end of the area to the other area so much easier. Sometimes you'll find a barricade that you can smash open. Now the path is open and it leads to a brand new area that you couldn't access before. This is once again Team Cherry being influenced and inspired by the Soul series. Sensing a pattern here? There is something so satisfying opening and seeing those connections that were so expertly crafted by the developers. The final thing about traversal I want to talk about is the platforming. It is absolute god tier. It is tight, challenging, rewarding, and definitely one of the highlights of the game. There's a section in the fungal wastes that has you descending. You can't see the next platform, but every time you step off the edge, you fall perfectly onto another ledge, avoiding the bubbling acid. There are other sections that aren't as forgiving. You'll have to use every jump, wall jump, and dash in order to avoid pools of acid, enemies, spikes, projectiles, and anything else the game can throw at you. I've definitely ran into some very challenging sections that always reward you with something useful at the end. There is so much more to say about this game, from the art style, to the characters, the White Palace, the Pantheon, the music, different challenges, the Dreamers, the Grim Troop. This is a game that just keeps on giving. Hollow Knight went from a game that I didn't really like to a game that is firmly in my top 25 of all time. It is a masterclass in every way. If you are at all into 2D platformers, Metroidvanias, challenging combat, or fast fluid action, I highly recommend giving this game a shot. Hollow Knight Silksong has become one of my most anticipated games thanks to Hollow Knight. But what did you think of Hollow Knight? Did the game take a second to click like it did for me? Were you enthralled with the world right away? Let me know down in the comments what your thoughts are. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. I had a ton of fun making this video, so please let me know if you want to see more of these moving forward. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.